Hello, welcome to my AP Gov project. Today we're going to discuss a question that has been debated for decades. Should members of Congress have term limits? Term limits would place a maximum number of years that a senator or a representative could serve in Congress. Unlike the president, who is limited to 2 term limits, members of Congress can currently serve as long as voters continue to re-elect them. This issue has broad public support. Around 80% of registered voters say that they favor some form of congressional term limits. Supporters exist among both Republicans and Democrats. However, there is an interesting contradiction. While many people support the idea, relatively few voters consider it a top political issue. Only about half of voters say that the issue would affect their votes at all. Yet, term limits could dramatically change how Congress operates. In 2024 elections, incumbents won about 95% of their races. Because incumbents are so difficult to defeat, term limits could significantly alter who holds power in Washington. Today, we'll examine both sides of the debate, discuss what it would take to implement term limits, and connect the issue to AP Gov concepts. Before looking at the arguments, it is important to understand what term limits would actually do. Term limits would require members of Congress to leave office after serving a certain number of terms. The exact limit would depend on how the constitutional amendment was written. The biggest effect would be an increased turnovers. Many long-serving members would eventually be forced to leave office, even if voters want to keep them. This would create a more open-seat elections and reduce the number of incumbents running for re-election. It could also change how members of Congress make decisions. If lawmakers know they cannot run again, they may behave differently than politicians who are focused on winning future elections. Term limits could also affect several AP government concepts. For example, they might shift representation away from a delegate model and more towards a trustee model. Representatives who do not need to worry about re-elections may feel freer to make decisions based on their own judgment, like a trustee model. Term limits would also affect iron triangles. By changing the long-term relationship between legislators, bureaucrats, and interest groups. Now we're going to take a moment to discuss what you guys think. If Congress had term limits, how do you think lawmakers would behave differently? Do you think a trustee model or a delegate model is better? Turn and discuss it at your tables. Supporters of term limits argue that the current system gives incumbents an enormous advantage. They say having term limits would minimize perpetual campaigning. Members of Congress spend significant amount of time raising money and preparing for future elections. Supporters argue that if lawmakers know they cannot run forever, they can spend more time governing and less time campaigning. This could encourage politicians to make difficult decisions, even when those decisions are unpopular. Let's pause and have a discussion. Would politicians make better decisions if they didn't have to worry about re-election? Or would they become less accountable to voters? Another important argument is encouraging citizen legislators. Supporters believe elected officials should not make politicians a lifelong career. Instead, they argue that representatives should come from ordinary careers, serve for a period of time, and then return to their private life. This could help Congress stay connected to the experiences of everyday Americans. Should serving in Congress be viewed as a temporary public service or as a long-term profession? Turn and discuss this with your table. A third major argument involves campaign money and incumbency. Incumbency usually raise far more money than challengers. They have established donors, networks, name recognition, and media attention. Because incumbents win more than 90% of elections, many races are not very competitive. Term limits would create more open seat races where no incumbent is running. Supporters argued this would make elections more competitive, reduce the advantages that come from simply already holding office. Here is something for you to ponder. Do you think the biggest advantage in congressional elections comes from money, experience, or name recognition? How might these term limits change that? Supporters also argued that term limits could bring fresh ideas into the government and reduce the influence of long-standing relationships between politicians and special interest groups. Opponents of term limits argue that experience matters. The most important argument against term limits is the loss of institutional knowledge. Congress deals with extremely complex issues like taxation, budgeting, national security, and even foreign policy. Many lawmakers spend years learning how these systems work. If experienced members are regularly forced out, Congress may lose valuable experience. New members could struggle to understand complicated policies and procedures. Now, I would like you to discuss, is experience in Congress more valuable than fresh perspectives? How much experience is enough? Another major concern is the possibility of increase in a lame duck mentality. A lame duck mentality is where lawmakers who know they are leaving office may become less responsive to voters. Instead of focusing on re-elections, they may focus on future careers, book deals, lobbying opportunities, or other political ambitions. Some critics would argue this could actually weaken accountability rather than strengthening it. If politicians cannot run again, who are they accountable to? The voters, their party, or themselves? Turn and talk with your table. Opponents also argue that term limits restrict voter choice. Every election already gives citizens the opportunity to remove elected officials. If voters want to keep an experienced representative, opponents ask why the government should prevent them from doing so. Finally, critics argue that removing experienced legislators could shift power towards congressional staff, bureaucrats, lobbyists, and even the executive branch, because those groups would more often have experience than the newly elected lawmakers. Do you guys think that having less experience in Congress would disrupt any of the checks and balances we have in place currently? Even though term limits are popular with the public, implementing them would be difficult. In the Supreme Court case, U.S. Term Limit Inc. versus Hawthorne, the court ruled that states cannot independently impose term limits on members of Congress. As a result, congressional term limits would require a constitutional amendment. A constitutional amendment can be proposed either by 2/3 of both the houses of Congress. It must be ratified by 3/4 of the state. This is an intentionally difficult process. Only 27 amendments have been added to the Constitution in American history. Many people also support age limits for members of Congress. However, age limits would also require a constitutional amendment. One reason term limits have not passed that Congress would essentially be limiting its own power. Many members who have built long careers in Congress may be reluctant to support restricting their own future service. Quick question. If term limits are supported by most Americans, why do you think they have never been adopted? What obstacles stand in the way? The debate over congressional term limits involves competing values. Supporters believe term limits would reduce careerism, create more competitive elections, lessen the influence of money and incumbency, and encourage citizen legislators. Opponents argue that term limits would remove experienced lawmakers, reduce voter choice, increase reliance on unelected experts, and potentially create less accountable politicians. The issue also connects directly to important AP Gov concepts, including representation, elections, interest groups, and constitutional amendment processes. As you think about this topic, consider one final question. Should the priority be keeping experienced lawmakers who voters choose to re-elect, or ensure regular turnovers and new perspectives in Congress? There's no easy answer, which is why this issue continues to generate debate across the political spectrum. Thank you for watching, and